The hum of the ship's engines died as it plummeted toward the surface of the unknown planet. Panic spread through the crew as they scrambled for control, but the ship was already too far gone. The crash was inevitable. "Braced for impact," shouted Captain Harris. His voice was calm, but his grip on the control panel was tight. With a deafening crash, the ship slammed into the rocky surface of the planet. Metal groaned, and glass shattered. The crew was thrown from their seats as the ship skidded across the jagged ground before finally coming to a halt. Silence. For a long moment, no one moved. The crew lay still, dazed and in pain from the impact. Captain Harris was the first to stir. He groaned, pushing himself up from the wreckage. His suit was ripped, but he was still alive. That was a small mercy. "Report," he ordered, his voice hoarse. His crew slowly began to recover, each of them shaken but unharmed. Corporal Jace checked the back of the ship, his eyes wide as he saw the damage. "Captain, we're stuck. The engines are completely fried. We won't be going anywhere soon." Captain Harris looked out through the broken windows of the cockpit. The planet outside was nothing like Earth. Towering mountains surrounded them, and the ground was rocky and barren, with deep cracks running through the earth. The sky was a strange, fiery orange, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. "Where are we?" Corporal Jace muttered, as if the question alone sent a chill down his spine. Captain Harris stood, brushing the dirt off his uniform. "I don't know, but we need to find shelter. We don't have much time." The crew stumbled out of the wreckage, their legs unsteady after the crash. They looked around, taking in the barren, lifeless terrain. There were no signs of life, nothing but rocky cliffs and jagged mountains in every direction. "All right, we're heading west," Captain Harris said, pointing toward a distant ridge. "We need to find resources and figure out how to survive. Stay close and stay alert. We don't know what's out there." The crew nodded, following him as they trekked across the rocky surface of the planet. The air felt different here, thicker, almost suffocating. Each breath they took felt heavier. The temperature was warm, but it didn't feel right. The heat came in waves, almost like it was pressing down on them, making each step feel like a chore. They moved in silence, only the crunch of rocks beneath their boots breaking the stillness. There were no birds, no animals, nothing. It was as though this planet was completely dead. The kind of place that had been abandoned for centuries, or perhaps even longer. After what felt like hours, they'd reached the foot of a mountain. The ground here was softer, covered with strange, thick vegetation. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Bright red plants with long, curling vines that seemed to reach for them as they walked by. "This doesn't look right," Corporal Jace muttered, his hand hovering near his weapon. "It's too quiet." Captain Harris frowned, scanning the horizon. "Keep your guard up. This isn't a normal planet." They made their way up the mountainside, the air growing thinner with every step. They hadn't gone far before they heard something, a low, rumbling growl that echoed across the ridge. The sound sent a shiver down their spines. It wasn't the wind or the planet's natural noises. It was something alive. Captain Harris signaled for everyone to stop. "Stay quiet. We don't know what that was." The growl grew louder, closer now. And then, as if from nowhere, a massive shadow appeared on the mountainside. It moved swiftly, its form barely visible in the fading light. The crew froze, eyes wide with fear. They weren't alone. Before they could react, the shadow lunged, revealing its true form. It was a creature, massive, with scales like armor and claws long enough to tear through steel. It was unlike anything the crew had ever seen, its glowing eyes piercing the darkness. "Get back," Captain Harris shouted, raising his rifle. The others quickly followed his lead, but the creature was faster. It leaped toward them with terrifying speed, forcing them to scatter in different directions. Jace stumbled backward as the creature's claws narrowly missed him. He could feel the heat radiating from its body. His heart raced as he fired a quick shot. but it barely made a dent in the creature's thick hide. Captain Harris didn't hesitate. He aimed his rifle at the creature's head and fired. The bullet hit, but it only angered the beast. It roared in fury and charged again. "Fall back," Harris ordered, already turning to run. "Get to cover, now." The crew sprinted, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The creature pursued them, its heavy footfalls echoing in the eerie silence of the DeathWorld. The only thing they could do was run, but they were no match for the beast. Jace ducked behind a large boulder as the creature passed by, its eyes glowing like fiery coals. His breath came in short gasps, and for a moment he thought they were done for. But then a sudden sound caught his attention, a rustling from the shadows. Another creature appeared, even larger and more menacing than the first. "What the hell is this place?" Jace whispered to himself, his heart pounding in his chest. They had barely escaped one monster, only to find themselves facing even more dangers. This was no ordinary planet. It was a death world, a place where only the strongest survived. And now, the crew of the ship would have to prove they were strong enough to live through it. Captain Harris turned, his eyes narrowed with determination. "We're not dying here. Keep moving. We find shelter, and we fight." As they moved deeper into the alien terrain, they realized something else. They weren't alone on this planet. There were others, and they needed to figure out how to survive. The crew had barely caught their breath when they realized the true scale of the danger they were in. The creature's growl echoed in the distance, a reminder of the looming threat. But it wasn't just one creature. It was only the beginning. Captain Harris held up his hand, signaling the crew to stop. He listened closely. The air was unnaturally still, as though even the wind was afraid to move. The silence was more terrifying than the growls of the beast they'd just encountered. "Everyone stay low," Harris whispered, his voice barely audible. "We don't know what else is out there." They crouched behind the boulders, scanning the horizon. The mountain ridge they had climbed was surrounded by a dense forest, with trees that towered over them, casting long shadows. The strange vegetation they had seen earlier was everywhere now, thick, twisting vines that seemed to move on their own. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. "There's something else out there," Corporal Jace muttered, his eyes wide. "I can feel it. It's watching us." The hairs on the back of Harris's neck stood up. He turned his gaze toward the trees, where movement flickered in the shadows. Someone was out there. He wasn't sure who or what, but he could sense it. "Stay close," Harris ordered, raising his rifle. "We're not alone. I want everyone on high alert." The crew moved carefully through the dense underbrush, the thick vines making it hard to move quickly. But every step they took was measured, their eyes darting around, constantly searching for any sign of the alien presence they felt but couldn't see. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. They didn't speak. There was no need to. The tension was so thick, you could almost cut it with a knife. Every crack of a twig, every rustle in the bushes, made them jump, their weapons raised in instinctive defense. Then they heard it. A low guttural sound. A whisper on the wind, the unmistakable sound of something large moving in the shadows. Captain Harris stopped. He held up his hand, signaling the crew to remain quiet. His heart was pounding. His eyes locked on the dense forest ahead, trying to make out any shapes in the darkness. "I see something," Corporal Jace said in a low voice, pointing toward the tree line. "There, do you see that?" The others squinted into the darkness. At first, it was just a blur, a shadow in the corner of their vision. But then it moved. Slowly, purposefully. It was something humanoid, but different, twisted and unnatural. The shape was almost indistinct, as though it had been designed to blend into its surroundings. The figure stepped forward, its features becoming clearer. It was taller than a human, its skin a dark, mottled green, with sharp, jagged spikes protruding from its back. Its eyes were completely black, gleaming with a malevolent intelligence. Captain Harris's grip on his rifle tightened. "What the hell is that?" Jace's voice shook with fear. "I don't know, but it's not human. It's an alien." The creature moved closer, its movements smooth and graceful despite its terrifying appearance. The crew instinctively backed away, but the creature didn't attack. It merely watched them, as though sizing them up, judging their worth. The silence between them was deafening. It was as though the alien was waiting for something. Maybe it was waiting for the humans to make the first move, to show their strength or their fear. But Harris wasn't about to show fear. He took a deep breath, his voice steady as he addressed the creature. "What do you want?" The alien cocked its head, studying him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the alien spoke in a language that was completely foreign to them. Its voice was low and rasping, like something scraping against metal. Jace leaned in, trying to make sense of the strange sound. I can't understand it," he said. "It's not speaking any language I know." Captain Harris didn't flinch. He'd been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. He was facing a species that didn't even speak his language, a species whose intentions were unknown. The creature's lips curled into a grin, revealing rows of sharp teeth. It wasn't a smile of friendliness. It was a grin of something darker. It stepped forward, its posture more aggressive now. And then, without warning, it lunged. "Get down," Harris shouted as the alien charged. The crew scattered in all directions, but the alien was faster than they expected. It grabbed Corporal Jace by the arm, throwing him against a nearby tree with a sickening thud. Harris fired a shot, but it barely grazed the alien's skin. It seemed to do nothing. "Jace!" screamed Harris, rushing to his side. But the alien wasn't done. It moved with terrifying speed, grabbing another crew member and slamming them to the ground. The creature was relentless, faster and stronger than anything the humans had ever faced. Harris's mind raced. They needed to fight back, but they were outmatched. He looked around, searching for anything that might help them. That's when he spotted it, something nearby that could be their only chance. "Cover me," he yelled, rushing toward a nearby pile of rocks. "I'm going for the weapons cache." The remaining crew opened fire, but the alien shrugged off the bullets as if they were nothing. Harris reached the cache, pulling out an explosive device. It was a last-ditch effort, but it was their only hope. He ran back toward the fight, his breath heavy. "I need cover." The crew focused their fire on the alien, but it was clear they weren't making a dent. Harris reached the group, positioning the explosive at the creature's feet. With a quick press of a button, it detonated. The explosion shook the ground, and the alien howled in pain. It staggered back, its body smoking and twitching. But it wasn't enough. The creature recovered quickly, its eyes glowing with fury. It roared and charged again, more determined than ever. And as it closed in, Harris realized one painful truth. This was only the beginning. The planet was home to far more dangers than they had realized. And if they were to survive, they had to become something stronger than human. They had to become the last hope of the galaxy. The explosion was a flash of light in the dense, shadowed forest, followed by a deafening roar. The earth shook beneath their feet as the alien staggered back, its body smoking from the blast. For a moment, everything went still. The forest fell into an eerie silence, the only sound being the strained breathing of the crew. Captain Harris didn't wait. He knew the alien wasn't finished. It was strong, too strong to be stopped by a single blast. They had to regroup and fast. "Fall back," Harris shouted, pulling Jace to his feet as the rest of the crew scrambled to form a defensive line. The alien was recovering quickly, its wounds healing in a way that made Harris's stomach churn. It wasn't just any creature, it was something far worse. The crew moved toward a small clearing, trying to put distance between themselves and the creature. Their weapons were out, but Harris knew it was unlikely that anything short of a miracle would stop the beast. But they didn't have time to worry about that. The planet was filled with dangers they hadn't even begun to understand. The alien they'd just fought was just a small part of something far bigger. And now, they were trapped in the middle of it. Harris turned to the group. "Listen up, we need to make it to the ship. We can't fight this thing head-on, but we can use our terrain advantage to outmaneuver it. Stay sharp and keep moving." "Where do we go?" Jace asked, still shaken from the earlier attack. "There's a cave system nearby," Harris replied, scanning the surroundings. "If we can reach it, we might be able to lose it in the tunnels. At the very least, it'll slow it down. But we need to move now, before it gets back up." The crew nodded, their expressions grim. They didn't have the luxury of time. They needed to move, or they would become the aliens' next victims. They ran, darting between the trees, trying to stay low and quiet. The aliens' roar echoed through the forest, a constant reminder that they were being hunted. Harris kept his rifle raised, eyes darting around to ensure nothing else was waiting to attack. They reached the entrance to the cave system within an hour, though it felt like a lifetime. The tunnel was dark, narrow, and winding, but it offered them the cover they desperately needed. "Stay close," Harris warned, his voice low. "We don't know what's down here, but it's our best chance." The crew moved through the tunnels, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. They had no idea what dangers lay ahead, but they had no choice but to keep going. The walls were damp, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. As they descended deeper, Harris felt a strange sense of unease. There was something about the way the tunnels twisted and turned that made it feel like they were walking into something far older than they could understand. "Captain," Jace whispered, his voice tinged with fear. "What if we're not alone down here?" Harris didn't answer right away. He had the same thought, but he wasn't about to admit it. The last thing they needed was for fear to take hold of them. "Keep moving," he said, trying to sound calm. But the deeper they went, the more he realized Jace wasn't wrong. The cave system felt like it had been built with purpose, and not by the hands of any natural creatures. There were symbols etched into the walls, strange, alien symbols that made Harris's skin crawl. He stopped for a moment, running his fingers over the markings. They don't look like anything we've seen before." "What do you think they mean?" asked Jace, his voice a whisper in the dark. Harris frowned. "I don't know, but we can't stick around to find out." The crew continued their descent, and the air grew colder the further they went. The tunnel seemed endless, winding around in circles, as though the cave was designed to confuse them. Harris felt the weight of their situation settling in. They weren't just fighting one alien. They were caught in something far bigger. Whatever force had created these tunnels, it had been here for far longer than they had been. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a small chamber. It was wide and open, with jagged rock formations that seemed to stretch up to the ceiling. The air here was thick with an unnatural stillness. "This looks like a place to stop and regroup," Harris said, his voice barely above a whisper. They set up a defensive perimeter, taking turns standing guard. Harris sat down on a rock, his thoughts racing. They were far from safe. They had no idea how many aliens were out there, or what kind of technology they had at their disposal. But they couldn't give up. Not now. They had to survive. Not just for themselves, but for the galaxy. If they could find a way to stop this alien threat, they could turn the tide in the war against these invaders. But first, they had to figure out how to get out of this cave alive. As the crew settled in for the night, Harris knew one thing for certain. Nothing was going to be easy on this savage DeathWorld, and whatever came next, they had to be ready. The alien they had encountered earlier was just the beginning. The real fight was only just starting. The crew huddled together in the dimly lit cave, the silence almost suffocating. Their bodies were sore from the constant tension, their minds clouded with the weight of uncertainty. No one spoke, but the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. They had come to this planet for a mission, but now it felt like they were in a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. Captain Harris paced back and forth in the small, narrow space. The air was heavy with moisture, and every breath he took felt like it was smothering him. The others were exhausted, but there was no time for rest. They had to keep moving. The alien they had encountered earlier was only one of many, and now they had to survive in a world where danger could strike from any direction. "Captain," Jace spoke up, his voice barely audible. "Do you think we'll make it out of here?" Harris didn't have an answer. How could he? They were trapped in the heart of an alien war zone, with no way to contact help, no way to escape. Every instinct in him told him to fight, to push forward, but doubt gnawed at his thoughts. "I don't know, Jace," Harris admitted, his voice rough. "But we'll do whatever it takes to survive." The tension in the air was thick. The crew had no idea what they were up against, and the constant unknowns kept them on edge. There were no guarantees. All they could do was keep going, keep moving through the dark, and hope that they could find a way out of this nightmare. Jace gave a small nod, but the doubt in his eyes didn't go unnoticed. The others, too, were looking to Harris for reassurance, but it was clear that none of them had any answers. Harris took a deep breath and forced himself to focus. "We need to keep our heads in the game. We're not the only ones down here, and I'm sure there are more dangers ahead. We have to be ready for anything." The crew nodded, but their expressions remained grim. They were warriors, yes, but even the strongest hearts could be broken by the weight of this endless terror. "We'll move out at first light," Harris continued, trying to sound confident. "Stay sharp. Keep your wits about you. We're getting out of here. We just need to find the right way." As night fell, the shadows seemed to grow deeper, pressing in on them from all sides. The only sounds were the occasional drip of water from the stalactites above, and the quiet whispers of the crew as they tried to rest. But sleep didn't come easy. Everyone lay awake, listening to the ominous creaks and groans of the cave around them, imagining the monsters that might be lurking in the dark. The following morning, they packed their gear and prepared to continue their journey deeper into the cave system. Harris led the group, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him like a physical force. Every turn felt like they were walking into a trap. Every shadow seemed to conceal something waiting to strike. "Keep your eyes open," Harris reminded them, his hand on the hilt of his weapon. "We don't know what's down here, but we can't afford to be caught off guard." They moved cautiously, the narrow path winding deeper into the earth. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air grew colder with every step. The further they went, the more the world above seemed to fade away, as though they were becoming lost in another reality, one where they were nothing more than prey. It wasn't long before they found something strange. In a larger chamber, they came across a series of markings on the walls, symbols that seemed both ancient and otherworldly. They weren't the same as the ones they had seen earlier, but they were no less disturbing. The markings were etched deep into the rock, glowing faintly with a soft, eerie light. "What is this?" Jace asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and fear. Harris crouched down, inspecting the markings. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever it is, it's not natural. These symbols, these patterns, they feel like they were made for a purpose." He glanced up at the crew. "Stay alert. This could be a trap, or it could be a clue. We need to keep moving." The crew nodded, but the tension was palpable. Every step felt like they were walking into a history they didn't understand, a history that had been hidden for ages, and now they were uncovering it piece by piece. As they moved deeper into the chamber, a strange humming sound filled the air. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but soon it grew louder. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, and Harris's hand instinctively went to his rifle. "What the hell is that?" Jace whispered. "I don't know," Harris said, "but I don't like it." The humming grew louder, reverberating through the cave walls. Suddenly, a blast of cold air rushed toward them from the depths of the chamber, and the ground shook violently. The walls around them began to crack, and pieces of rock fell from the ceiling. Harris raised his rifle. "Get back. Move." But before they could react, a massive shape emerged from the shadows of the cavern, a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. It was tall, its body covered in scales that shimmered in the faint light. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural hue, and its mouth was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. The creature roared, a deafening sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cave. The crew froze in terror, their weapons aimed at the beast, but it was clear they were outmatched. Harris knew this wasn't just a creature. It was something far more dangerous, far more ancient, and it was coming for them. The creature's roar echoed through the chamber, vibrating the walls, and for a moment, the entire team was frozen in place. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though something ancient and malevolent had awakened deep within the planet. Captain Harris's heart raced in his chest, but his mind was still sharp. He knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary alien. It was far more than a predator. This was something that had been waiting, hidden in the shadows, for the right moment to strike. The team instinctively raised their weapons, but Harris knew they stood little chance. They were outmatched, outclassed. The beast's eyes glowed with an unnatural, eerie light, its massive form shifting as it stalked forward, its muscles rippling beneath its scaled skin. Every step it took sent tremors through the ground, and the air grew even colder, thick with the scent of decay. "Don't fire unless I say so," Harris shouted, his voice hoarse but authoritative. Jace, his hand shaking as he gripped his rifle, nodded, but it was clear he was struggling to keep his fear in check. The others weren't much better. Each of them had fought battles, had faced death before, but this creature, this force of nature, was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. "We need to move, Captain," Jace whispered, barely audible over the sound of the beast's growls. "We don't have the luxury of running," Harris replied, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "We need to figure out what this thing wants, and we need to do it quickly." The creature's eyes locked onto Harris, its gaze cold and calculating. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying the humans with an intelligence that felt almost unnatural. Harris could see the deadly potential behind those glowing eyes. The beast was no simple animal. It was something far more dangerous. The crew's breathing became shallow, each of them waiting for the inevitable attack. Harris could feel his pulse pounding in his temples. His mind raced for a plan, anything that could save them. But in the back of his mind, a nagging thought lingered. Something wasn't right. They had stumbled onto something far beyond their understanding, and now they were paying the price. Just as the beast took a step forward, Harris acted. "Open fire," he ordered. The sound of gunfire shattered the silence as the crew unleashed everything they had. But the creature's movements were lightning fast, and its thick hide seemed to absorb the blasts. The bullets that hit it barely seemed to slow it down. It growled in irritation, its jaws snapping open wide as it charged. "Move. Now," Harris barked, his voice sharp with urgency. The crew scattered, diving to the sides as the beast lunged forward. Its claws scraped across the ground, sending a shower of rocks and dust into the air. It was too fast, too strong, and the fear that gripped the humans now was palpable. Harris's mind was working at full speed, trying to find some way to survive this nightmare. They couldn't keep firing at it. Nothing seemed to work. The creature wasn't just an animal. It was something far more dangerous. It was as though the very environment around them had become an enemy, turning against them, twisting reality into a nightmare they couldn't escape. As the crew regrouped, Harris noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There were markings on the creature's body, patterns that matched the strange symbols they had found earlier in the cave. Was it possible that these symbols were connected to the creature, that it had been bound or controlled by some ancient force? "We need to get to those markings," Harris muttered to himself. "They might be our only chance." But just as he turned to make a move, the creature lunged again. This time, its massive claws slashed through the air, catching Harris off guard. He barely managed to dodge, but the force of the blow sent him crashing into the rocky wall, knocking the wind out of him. For a moment, everything went silent. The beast paused, as though savoring its victory. Harris's vision swam, and his body ached from the impact. His mind was blurry, but he knew he couldn't afford to stay down. Not now. Not with his team depending on him. With a grunt, he pushed himself up, struggling to stay on his feet. The creature turned its attention back to him, its eyes glowing with hunger. "Captain," Jace called from across the chamber. "We need a plan. Now." Harris's mind raced. His team was in danger, and they couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. The creature was too powerful, too unpredictable. But there was one thing Harris had learned over the years. You couldn't defeat a powerful enemy by playing by its rules. You had to outthink it. He glanced at the markings on the creature's body again. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, but they were his only lead. Harris took a deep breath and shouted, "Get to the markings. If we can figure out what they mean, we might be able to stop it." The crew reacted instantly, moving with a sense of urgency as they dodged the creature's attacks. The alien beast howled in frustration, but it couldn't stop them from getting closer. The team's movements were swift, synchronized, as they darted toward the symbols etched into the walls of the cave. If they could just reach them, maybe they could find a way to bring the beast down. As Harris made his way toward the markings, a sense of determination filled him. They were in the heart of the nightmare now, but he wasn't going to let his crew die without a fight. This planet was savage, but so were they. The markings on the wall seemed to pulse with a strange energy as they got closer, and Harris could feel the air around him shift. Something was changing. The creature howled once more, its rage growing. But Harris wasn't backing down. Not now. The air felt different as Harris and his crew approached the ancient markings etched into the walls of the cave. A strange, almost electric sensation hummed in the air, as if the very environment was alive with energy. The beast was still stalking them, its heavy steps shaking the ground, but Harris couldn't afford to be distracted. The markings held the key to their survival. If they could decipher what they meant, they might stand a chance. The crew scattered, each member focusing on a different part of the markings, their eyes scanning the symbols, searching for something that made sense. The creature's growls reverberated off the walls, but they pushed forward, knowing that they had no other choice. "Do you see anything?" Harris asked Jace, who was closest to a set of symbols on the far wall. Jace didn't respond at first, his fingers running over the markings as if he were trying to feel their meaning, not just see it. Finally, he looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't know what this is, Captain. But these symbols, they look like a warning, like they were placed here to keep something in check." "A warning?" Harris repeated, moving closer. "What kind of warning?" "It's like a seal," Jace said, his voice growing more intense. "These markings, they seem to be binding something dangerous." Harris's heart skipped a beat. A binding. Could it be that the creature, this massive, terrifying beast, wasn't just some wild animal? Was it possible that it had been imprisoned here, locked away by an ancient civilization, to keep it from causing destruction across the galaxy? The more Harris thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fall into place. The markings weren't just some random symbols. They were a language, a warning to anyone who might come across the creature. It had been trapped here for a reason, and now it was free. "Do you think this beast could be the result of whatever sealed it?" Harris asked, turning to the rest of the crew. "I think we've been dealing with something far bigger than we ever realized," Jace replied. "This creature, it's not just a predator. It's part of something much more dangerous. And if we don't stop it, it could destroy everything." The ground trembled once again as the creature roared in fury. It had been circling them, waiting for the right moment to strike. But now, it seemed to be growing more agitated as the humans examined the markings, as if it could sense that they were getting closer to understanding the truth. "We need to figure out how to reverse the seal," Harris said, his voice hard with determination. "If we can restore it, maybe we can trap it again." But Jace shook his head. "It's not that simple. These symbols are ancient. I don't think we can just copy them or redraw them. We need to understand what they truly mean." Harris cursed under his breath. They didn't have the time to study this in detail. The creature was too close, and the planet's hostile atmosphere wasn't making things any easier. But they had no choice. The markings were their only hope. "Then we'll have to make do with what we have," Harris said, his eyes scanning the cave. "We'll take what we know and make it work. We can't afford to waste time." He signaled to the rest of the crew to continue their work. "Start looking for any pattern, anything that could help us." The crew worked in silence, each member focusing on deciphering the markings in front of them. It was clear that these symbols were more than just a seal. They were a story, a message left behind by a civilization that had long since passed. The more Harris examined the markings, the more he realized that they weren't just a warning about the creature. They were a record, a chronicle of something much larger. A war, a conflict, and a warning to anyone who would dare to uncover the creature's true purpose. As the crew worked, the creature continued to move closer. Its growls became louder, more insistent. It was clear that it wasn't just hunting them. It was trying to stop them from discovering the truth. And as Harris's mind raced, he couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation. They were running out of time. Suddenly, Jace's voice broke the silence. "Captain, I think I've found something." Harris turned, his pulse quickening. Jace was pointing at a section of the wall that seemed to pulse with a faint glow. The markings there were different, more complex than the others. They seemed to shimmer as if they were alive. This part here," Jace said, his voice filled with awe. "It's not just a symbol. It's a code, a key to the creature's power." Harris stepped closer, his breath catching as he took in the glowing symbols. There was no time to waste. They had to figure this out, and fast. "Can you decode it?" Harris asked. "I think so," Jace replied, his fingers tracing the symbols. "It's a sequence, a pattern. If we can match it, we might be able to deactivate the seal." But Jace hesitated. "There's a risk. If we get it wrong, the creature might be able to break free completely. We'll be facing something far worse than we can imagine." Harris didn't have time to think about the consequences. They had to try. "Do it," Harris ordered. "We don't have a choice." Jace nodded and began to work quickly, his fingers moving over the glowing symbols with precision. The rest of the crew held their breath, their eyes trained on the symbols. The creature was getting closer. They could feel its presence, like a shadow creeping over them. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, and the ground trembled violently. The creature let out an ear-splitting roar, and for a moment, everything seemed to go silent. Jace's voice broke through the silence. "It's working. The seal is reacting." Harris felt a rush of hope, but before he could say anything, the beast lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air. They had to finish this. Now. The air was thick with tension as the ground continued to tremble beneath their feet. Harris could hear the creature's claws scraping against the rocky cave walls, getting closer with every passing second. They had no time left. The beast's roar echoed through the dark cavern, shaking their nerves and sending a wave of fear rippling through the crew. Jace's hands were shaking as he continued to work. Sweat dripped down his face, but his focus never wavered. The glowing symbols on the wall pulsed with energy, almost as if they were alive. Harris could see the pattern beginning to form, a sequence that could finally activate the seal. They had only one shot. "Keep going, Jace. You're almost there," Harris shouted, trying to drown out the growl of the beast that was now only moments away from launching its attack. The creature's massive form appeared in the entrance of the cave, its glowing eyes filled with rage. It looked even more terrifying up close, a perfect blend of savage power and primal fury. Its muscles rippled as it stalked toward them, its breath coming in heavy, angry bursts. The air felt charged with its presence, as if the planet itself was shaking in fear. "We have to finish this," Harris yelled to the crew, rallying them to make one last stand. They backed away slowly, trying to form a defensive perimeter. The creature's eyes flickered between them, its focus narrowing on Harris, the apparent leader of the group. But Jace was their last hope, the key to stopping the creature and, perhaps, the planet's destruction. Jace muttered under his breath as he continued working, tracing the symbols with quick, precise movements. The glowing markings seemed to flicker brighter with each stroke, resonating with an energy that felt almost ancient. It was as though they were tapping into a force beyond anything they could comprehend. Suddenly, a loud crack filled the air, and the ground beneath their feet shook violently. The creature roared in fury, its claws slashing toward them, but just as it moved to strike, Jace let out a triumphant shout. "I've got it," he screamed. The wall in front of them flared to life, and a surge of light shot from the symbols. The energy in the air crackled with power, and the cave walls seemed to vibrate with an almost painful intensity. The creature halted in its tracks, its glowing eyes now filled with confusion and pain as the light from the seal began to pulse and expand outward. Harris didn't hesitate. "Get back. Now." The crew scattered, diving for cover as the beam of energy shot into the air, pushing the creature back with incredible force. The beast howled in pain, its massive body twisting and writhing against the energy like a trapped animal. Its claws slashed through the air, but the light from the seal was too powerful. The creature's movements grew slower, more erratic, as if the energy was slowly draining its strength. Jace staggered backward, wiping sweat from his brow as the last of the symbols finished glowing. The creature screeched one final, deafening cry before it was forced to the ground, its body trembling violently. The seal had done its work. It had reactivated the trap. Harris watched, his heart pounding in his chest as the creature's form began to shrink, its massive limbs curling in on themselves as the energy from the seal continued to push it down. The glow of its eyes slowly faded as it was pulled back into the earth, its body vanishing into the dark abyss below. The ground shook one last time, and then silence. The crew remained frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. The creature was gone. Harris felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, his body slumping against the cave wall. They had survived, but it had been close. Too close. "Is it really over?" Jace asked, his voice barely a whisper. Harris stood up slowly, glancing around at the rest of the crew. He could see the relief on their faces, but he wasn't ready to believe it was over. They had faced something unimaginable, something that had been sealed away for a reason. The creature was powerful, but there was no telling what else this planet held. What other secrets were hidden beneath its surface? "We don't know yet," Harris replied, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "We've survived this, but that doesn't mean we're out of danger. This planet is more than we thought." The crew nodded in agreement, but for now, they were alive. They had faced the unimaginable and come out victorious. Harris allowed himself a small sigh of relief before turning to face the rest of the cave. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the moment, they had won. As they made their way out of the cave, the sky outside was still dark, but the air had shifted. The oppressive feeling that had settled over them was gone. Whatever had caused the creature's rage, it had been sealed away, at least for now. But Harris couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There were still many mysteries left to uncover on this savage world. "Let's head back to the ship," he said. "We've earned a break, but we're not done yet. Not by a long shot." And as they made their way back to the ship, the dark sky overhead seemed to whisper of secrets yet to be revealed, of challenges yet to be faced. The war zone of this savage planet might be over, but the real battle, the battle for answers, was just beginning.